The security checkpoint at Nexus Station buzzed with the usual chaos of interstellar travel. Beings from dozens of worlds shuffled through scanners while automated voices droned security protocols in 17 different languages. Among them stood Sarah Chen, her weathered hand steady as she placed her belongings in the scanning tray. The rifle went in last, a custom-built precision instrument that had seen action across 3 sectors, its polymer stock worn smooth from years of faithful service. The weapon had been her constant companion through the Outer Rim conflicts, a tool that had saved countless lives and ended just as many threats to human colonies. Next, called the Altarian security officer, his forearms moving with practiced efficiency as he processed travelers. When Sarah's tray passed through the scanner, alarms immediately shrieked. Red lights bathed the checkpoint in warning hues as automated systems locked down the area. "Weapon detected," announced the scanner's artificial voice. "Class 7 kinetic projectile device. Confiscation protocol initiated." The Altarian's compound eyes fixed on Sarah with obvious disdain. "Human, you cannot bring this primitive slug thrower aboard a civilian transport." "Weapons are prohibited." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I have proper licensing. Military discharge papers, security contractor permits. Everything's in order." She gestured to her documentation pad, which displayed an impressive array of official seals and authorizations. "Irrelevant," the officer clicked, his mandibles spreading in what passed for a sneer among his species. "Station regulations supersede human military credentials. The weapon will be confiscated and destroyed according to protocol." Other travelers began to gather, sensing drama. A cluster of Zenthari merchants whispered among themselves, their crystalline skin flickering with amusement. 2 massive Corvaxi traders, each standing nearly 8 feet tall, chuckled deep in their throats. To them, humans were little more than clever animals who had stumbled into space travel through luck rather than merit. "That weapon has sentimental value," Sarah said, her voice remaining level despite the growing frustration. "It belonged to my father and his father before him. 3 generations of service." The Altarian officer's laugh was a harsh chittering sound. "Humans and their emotional attachments to tools. How quaint. Security will dispose of this relic properly." He signaled to his colleagues, 4 armed guards who approached with obvious confidence. "Ma'am, please step aside," said the largest guard, a Corvaxi whose species prided itself on physical dominance. "Any resistance will result in additional charges." Sarah looked around the checkpoint, noting the positions of everyone present. 5 security officers total, all armed with standard-issue stun weapons. Civilians scattered throughout the area, most of whom clearly viewed humans as inferior. The Altarian officer was already reaching for her rifle with one of his secondary arms. "I suppose you think humans are helpless without our weapons," Sarah said quietly, stepping back from the scanning station. Her posture remained relaxed, almost casual, but something in her tone made the nearest Zenthari merchant take an involuntary step backward. "Obviously," replied the Corvaxi guard. "Your species relies entirely on crude tools to compensate for physical weakness. Without your primitive projectile weapons, humans are essentially defenseless." Sarah nodded slowly as if considering this assessment. "Interesting theory. Tell me, have any of you ever studied human military history?" The Altarian officer's mandibles clicked with amusement. "Why would we waste time studying the warfare of a species barely 2 centuries out of their gravity well? Humans have been in space for what, 200 years? My people have been traveling between stars for over 3 millennia. "True," Sarah agreed. "But in those 200 years, we've been involved in more armed conflicts than most species experience in 1,000. We've fought on airless moons and gas giant atmospheres aboard generation ships and in the deepest gravity wells. We've battled pirates, rebels, alien invaders, and each other with equal effectiveness." She glanced at her rifle one last time, as the Altarian officer secured it in an evidence container. "But the thing is, we were fighting each other for thousands of years before we ever touched a firearm. Humans developed an entire science around unarmed combat long before we reached the stars." The Corvaxi guard laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Hand-to-hand combat? Against trained security officers? You would be unconscious before you could take 3 steps." 83 seconds, Sarah said simply. "What?" "That's my estimate. 83 seconds to neutralize all 5 of you without sustaining significant injury to myself or any bystanders." She rolled her shoulders slightly, loosening muscles that had remained tense during the confrontation. Of course, that's assuming you don't surrender first. The checkpoint fell silent except for the hum of machinery and the distant sound of starship engines. Even the background chatter of travelers died away as every being within earshot focused on the small human woman who had just challenged 5 armed security officers. Though for Altarian officers' compound eyes narrowed. You're either insane or suffering from some form of delusion common to your species. Guards, restrain this human for psychological evaluation. The Corvaxi guard reached for Sarah's arm with confidence born of size and strength. His species was known throughout the galaxy for their physical prowess, and he outweighed the human by at least 100 pounds. His massive hand closed around her wrist like a vice. Sarah smiled. What happened next would be discussed in security briefings across 3 sectors for months to come. The human woman moved with a speed and precision that defied every assumption the alien security team had made about her species. Her free hand struck the Corvaxi's elbow with surgical precision, hyperextending the joint while simultaneously stepping inside his reach. The massive alien's roar of pain was cut short as Sarah's knee found his solar plexus with devastating accuracy. As he doubled over, gasping, she pivoted and drove her elbow into the nerve cluster at the base of his skull. The Corvaxi collapsed like a felled tree, unconscious before he hit the deck. Elapsed time, 7 seconds. The remaining 4 guards stared in shock as their largest colleague lay motionless on the checkpoint floor. The human had moved so fast that many of the watching aliens weren't even sure what they had witnessed. 76 seconds remaining, Sarah announced calmly, settling into a fighting stance that spoke of decades of training and real-world application. Anyone else want to test the theory that humans are helpless without weapons? The second guard to move was a Veltaran, his serpentine body coiling as he drew his stun weapon. His species was known for lightning-fast reflexes and venomous fangs that could paralyze most humanoids within seconds. As his weapon cleared its holster, he was already calculating the optimal angle for a non-lethal takedown. Sarah was faster. She closed the distance between them in 3 quick steps, her hand clamping down on his wrist before he could bring the weapon to bear. The Veltaran hissed and struck with his fangs, but Sarah had already anticipated the attack. She twisted away from his bite while maintaining her grip on his weapon arm, using his own momentum against him. The sound of breaking bone echoed through the checkpoint as Sarah applied a textbook joint lock, forcing the Veltaran to drop his weapon. Before he could recover, her knee found his ribcage with piledriver force. The serpentine alien's hiss became a wheeze as the impact drove the air from his lungs and cracked at least 2 ribs. Sarah's follow-up strike was a precise blow to the nerve cluster behind his head. The Veltaran's eyes rolled back and he joined his Corvaxi colleague on the floor in unconscious defeat. Elapsed time, 19 seconds. The 3 remaining guards exchanged nervous glances. What they had just witnessed violated everything they knew about human capabilities. Their species' intelligence briefings on humans emphasized their reliance on technology and tools. Nothing had prepared them for this demonstration of raw combat effectiveness. "This is impossible," muttered the Altarian officer, his mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. "Humans are weak, slow, and dependent on machinery. Your species has barely any natural weapons or armor." Sarah wiped a small trickle of blood from her knuckle, where it had scraped against the Veltaran's scaled hide. "That's the mistake everyone makes when they first encounter humans. You see our lack of claws, fangs, or natural armor and assume we're defenseless, but you're missing the most dangerous weapon any species can possess." "Which is?" demanded one of the remaining guards, a Zephyrian whose wings were fluttering nervously despite his aggressive posture. "Intelligence combined with ruthless adaptability," Sarah replied. "Humans don't have natural weapons because we learned to make better ones. We don't have armor because we learned to avoid getting hit. We don't have superior strength because we learned to use leverage and technique to overcome stronger opponents." The Zephyrian guard launched himself into the air, using his species' natural flight advantage to attack from above with his stun weapon. It was a tactical move that had worked against dozens of ground-bound opponents in the past. Zephyrians were aerial specialists, and their 3-dimensional combat style was nearly impossible for most species to counter effectively. Sarah had fought Zephyrian pirates in the Outer Rim. As the winged alien dove toward her, Sarah grabbed a scanning tray from the security station and hurled it with perfect timing. The metal tray struck the Zephyrian's left wing at its most vulnerable joint, disrupting his flight pattern and sending him tumbling toward the ground. Sarah was already moving to intercept him. As the Zephyrian crashed into the checkpoint floor, she landed on his back with both knees, driving the air from his lungs while simultaneously grabbing his head and applying a sleeper hold that cut off blood flow to his brain. The guard's struggles weakened rapidly as oxygen deprivation took effect. Within 15 seconds, the Zephyrian was unconscious. Elapsed time, 41 seconds. The watching crowd had grown larger as word of the confrontation spread through the station. Beings from dozens of species pressed closer to witness the impossible spectacle of a single human, systematically dismantling trained security officers without weapons. Many of them had never seen humans in combat, and were discovering that their preconceptions about the species were dangerously inadequate. 42 seconds remaining, Sarah announced, straightening up and facing the two remaining guards. Neither looked particularly eager to continue the engagement. The fourth guard was a Nexari, her crystalline exoskeleton supposedly providing superior protection against physical attacks. Nexari were silicon-based life forms with bodies like living gemstones, and their species had served as shock troops for various military organizations across the galaxy. Their natural armor made them nearly immune to conventional hand-to-hand combat techniques. Nearly immune. "You cannot harm me, human," the Nexari declared, raising her stun weapon. "My exoskeleton is harder than most metals. Your soft flesh will break against my body long before you can cause meaningful damage." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "True, I probably can't break through your exoskeleton with direct strikes. But every crystal has flaws, stress points where the molecular structure is weakest, and after 20 years of fighting in space, I've learned to spot them." The Nexari fired her stun weapon, but Sarah was already moving. The electrical discharge missed by inches as the human rolled behind a luggage cart. The Nexari advanced confidently, her crystalline feet ringing against the metal deck plating like bells. Sarah emerged from cover with a piece of broken scanning equipment in her hand, its metal edge sharp enough to cut through most materials. The Nexari laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Crude tools will not save you, human." But Sarah wasn't attacking the Nexari's body. Instead, she struck the floor directly beneath the alien's feet with surgical precision, hitting the exact point where the deck plating had been stressed by years of heavy foot traffic. The metal buckled and cracked, creating an uneven surface that caught the Nexari's foot at precisely the wrong angle. The crystalline being's superior armor became a liability as she lost her balance and crashed into a support pillar with tremendous force. The impact sent hairline fractures racing through her exoskeleton, and she crumpled to the ground, stunned and immobilized by damage to her internal crystal matrix. Elapsed time, 68 seconds. One guard remained. The Altarian officer who had started this confrontation was now backing away, his forearms trembling as he held his stun weapon with uncertain aim. His compound eyes darted between his fallen colleagues and the human who had defeated them all with nothing but bare hands and tactical thinking. 15 seconds left, Sarah said calmly, walking toward him with measured steps. "You can surrender now and avoid the embarrassment of joining your team on the floor, or we can finish this the hard way." The Altarian's mandibles clicked frantically. "Stay back." "I'll fire!" "I'll call for backup." "You already tried firing," Sarah pointed out. "And backup is probably watching from the observation deck, trying to figure out how to explain this in their incident report." She was right. Security cameras had captured everything, and station personnel were already gathering to witness the conclusion of what would become one of the most legendary confrontations in Nexus Station's history. The Altarian officer's weapon shook in his primary hands as sweat began to bead on his chitinous forehead. His species had evolved on a world where predators were rare, and conflict was usually resolved through complex social negotiations rather than physical confrontation. Nothing in his training had prepared him for facing a human in actual combat. "This is madness," he chittered, his voice rising in pitch. "Humans are supposed to be peaceful traders and merchants. Your species files diplomatic protests when conflicts arise. You negotiate, you compromise, you find peaceful solutions." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but there was something predatory in her eyes that made several nearby observers take involuntary steps backward. "That's what we do when we're being civilized. But you decided to steal something that belonged to my family, insult my species, and treat me like a primitive animal. So now you get to see what humans were like before we learned civilization. The truth was beginning to dawn on many of the watching aliens. They had made the same mistake that countless species throughout galactic history had made when encountering humanity for the first time. They had seen human diplomacy, human trade agreements, human scientific cooperation, and assumed that represented the full extent of human capability. They had never seen humans at war. 10 seconds, Sarah announced, continuing her steady advance. The Altarian fired his stun weapon in desperation, but his hands were shaking too badly for accurate aim. The electrical discharge went wide, striking a decorative plant instead of its intended target. Sarah moved like flowing water, her body seeming to bend around the officer's frantic attempts to track her with his weapon. Years of combat experience had taught her how to read an opponent's intentions through subtle body language cues. She could see where he would aim before he even knew it himself. Her attack, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. A simple joint lock that took advantage of the Altarian's complex arm structure, applying pressure to nerve clusters that existed in roughly the same locations across most humanoid species. The officer's weapon clattered to the floor as his primary arms went numb, and Sarah's follow-up strike to his temple put him down gently but decisively. Elapsed time, 81 seconds. The checkpoint fell into absolute silence. 5 trained security officers lay unconscious or incapacitated on the floor, defeated by a single human who hadn't even broken into a sweat during the encounter. The watching crowd stared in stunned disbelief as Sarah calmly straightened her jacket and walked back to the scanning station. "Now then," she said, addressing the automated systems that had initially detected her weapon. "I believe there was some confusion about my rifle." A new voice cut through the silence. "There's been no confusion, only gross incompetence." Station Commander Thexaron emerged from the crowd, his massive Korvaxi frame making the other beings scatter to clear a path. As the senior official on Nexus Station, he had been monitoring the security feeds and was now seeing the aftermath of what could only be described as a complete disaster. The commander looked down at his unconscious security team with obvious disgust. 5 officers defeated by 1 unarmed human in under 90 seconds. This is exactly the kind of incident that makes our species look like fools in front of the Galactic Council. He turned to Sarah with something approaching respect in his eyes. "Ma'am, I apologize for the unprofessional conduct of my security team. Your documentation is clearly in order, and your weapon will be returned immediately." Sarah nodded gracefully. "Thank you, Commander. I appreciate your intervention." "Intervention?" Thexaron laughed, a sound like grinding boulders. "Ma'am, I'm not intervening to help you. I'm intervening to prevent you from putting my entire security force in the medical bay. The 5 officers you just defeated represent nearly a quarter of my trained personnel." He gestured to the fallen guards with one massive arm. "These fools made the classic mistake of judging humans by your appearance rather than your capabilities. They saw a small, soft-looking being and assumed weakness. They forgot that humans have been fighting wars since before. Most of our species developed spaceflight." The crowd was beginning to murmur among themselves as the implications of what they had witnessed began to sink in. For many of them, this was their first real glimpse of human combat capability, and it was forcing them to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about the species. A young Zenthari merchant pushed forward through the crowd, his crystalline skin flickering with nervous energy. "Commander, surely this was some kind of anomaly. This human must have special training or augmentation. Normal humans couldn't possibly—" "Normal humans," Thexaron interrupted, "defeated the Zerathi hive fleets with primitive chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. Normal humans fought a 3-way war in the Centauri system, while simultaneously establishing trade relations with 4 different alien species. Normal humans have been involved in more armed conflicts in the last 2 centuries than most species experience in a millennium." He pointed at Sarah, who was calmly collecting her belongings from the scanning station. "This woman is probably a retired soldier or security contractor. Human military veterans are scattered throughout the galaxy, working as guards, escorts, and peacekeepers. Most of them never advertise their capabilities because they prefer to avoid unnecessary conflict." Sarah's rifle was returned to her in its original case, along with her other confiscated items. She checked the weapon quickly but thoroughly, verifying that it hadn't been damaged during the incident. Satisfied that everything was in order, she shouldered the case and prepared to continue her journey. "Ma'am," called Thexaron as she walked toward the departure gates. Might I ask what your military background is? Sarah paused and turned back to face him. 20 years in the Colonial Marines, specialized in hostile environment operations. 3 tours in the Outer Rim conflicts, 2 anti-piracy campaigns, and 1 classified operation that I'm not authorized to discuss. And your current occupation? Retired. I'm traveling to New Geneva to visit my grandchildren. Sarah's expression softened slightly. I was hoping to show them their great-grandfather's rifle and tell them stories about the old days. Family history is important to humans. The commander nodded slowly. Indeed it is. And I imagine those stories will be quite educational for the young ones. Oh yes, Sarah agreed. Humans have always believed in teaching our children about both the cost of peace and the price of freedom. It's how we make sure they understand why both are worth protecting. As she walked away toward the departure gates, conversations erupted throughout the checkpoint. Beings from dozens of species were frantically accessing their personal data pads, downloading human military histories and combat manuals. The incident had shattered long-held assumptions about human capabilities, and everyone wanted to understand exactly what they had just witnessed. Within hours, security footage of the incident had spread throughout the galactic communications network. The video was shared, analyzed, and discussed on countless worlds as beings struggled to understand what they had witnessed. Military academies across 3 sectors began incorporating the footage into their training programs as an example of how underestimating an opponent could lead to catastrophic failure. On the transport ship Aurora's Dream, Sarah found herself the center of unwanted attention. Fellow passengers whispered among themselves and pointed at her when they thought she wasn't looking. Most gave her a wide berth, unsure how to interact with someone who had just demonstrated such devastating combat capability. The ship's captain, a grizzled Andromedian named Krelthok, approached her table in the passenger lounge with obvious caution. His species was known for their tactical acumen and military tradition, and he recognized a dangerous opponent when he saw one. "Ma'am, I hope you don't mind the intrusion," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "I wanted to personally welcome you aboard and assure you that my crew will treat you with appropriate respect." Sarah looked up from the data pad, where she had been reading news from the human colonies. "That's very kind of you, Captain. I hope my earlier incident at the station won't cause any problems during the voyage." Krelthok laughed, a sound like distant thunder. "Problems? Ma'am, half my passengers are requesting transfers to other ships because they're afraid to be in the same transport as you. The other half are begging for autographs and asking for combat lessons." "I'm not looking for fame or students," Sarah replied quietly. "I just want to visit my family in peace." "I understand completely," the captain assured her. "But you've accomplished something significant today, whether you intended to or not. For decades, humans have been viewed by many species as junior partners in galactic civilization, clever enough to be useful, but not quite mature enough to be equals." He activated his own datapad and showed her the news feeds that were already spreading across the galaxy. "Your demonstration has forced every major government to reevaluate their assumptions about human capabilities. The Altarian Commerce Guild is already issuing new protocols for dealing with human civilians. The Korvaxi Military Council is requesting detailed reports on human combat training methods." Sarah sighed and rubbed her temples. "I didn't want to start an interstellar incident. I just wanted my father's rifle back." "You didn't start anything," Krelthok corrected. "You simply revealed truths that were already there. The fault lies with those who chose ignorance over understanding." A commotion near the lounge entrance drew their attention. A group of young Veltaran officers had entered the compartment and were looking around with obvious purpose. Their leader, a female with distinctive scarring on her scales, spotted Sarah and approached with military bearing. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of professional training. "Are you the human from the Nexus Station incident?" Sarah nodded warily. "I am. I am Lieutenant Commander Silvara of the Veltaran Defense Force. I was hoping to speak with you about your combat techniques. My government is very interested in learning more about human military training methods." "I'm retired," Sarah said firmly. "I'm not looking to train soldiers or share military secrets." "I understand your position," Silvara replied. "But consider this. Knowledge of human capabilities is spreading throughout the galaxy whether you participate or not. Wouldn't it be better if that knowledge came from accurate sources rather than speculation and rumor?" She activated a portable holo display that showed news feeds from across known space. "Look at these reports. The Zerathi are claiming that humans must have hidden cybernetic enhancements. The Zephyrian Council is suggesting that your species has been concealing military technology. Some groups are even proposing that humans be reclassified as a potential military threat. Sarah studied the news feeds with growing concern. She could see how quickly misunderstanding was spreading, and how easily fear could replace the respect she had hoped to achieve. What exactly are you suggesting, Commander? A simple demonstration, Silvara explained. Allow military observers from several allied species to witness proper human combat training. Show them that what you accomplished was the result of skill and preparation, not hidden technology or genetic modification. Help them understand that humans earn their capabilities through dedication and practice. Captain Krelthok leaned forward with interest. It's not a bad idea. The truth is often less frightening than speculation. Sarah considered the proposal carefully. She had spent 20 years fighting to protect human colonies and trade routes. Now in retirement, she was being asked to fight a different kind of battle, one for understanding and respect rather than territory or resources. What kind of demonstration are you talking about? She asked finally. Silvara's relief was evident. Nothing elaborate. Basic hand-to-hand combat techniques, weapon handling procedures, tactical thinking exercises. Show them how humans train for combat situations and explain the philosophy behind your methods. The philosophy is simple, Sarah said. Humans learned long ago that we're not the strongest, fastest, or most naturally armed species in the galaxy. So we developed techniques that rely on intelligence, adaptability, and preparation rather than raw physical power. She gestured to the other passengers in the lounge, most of whom were still watching her with a mixture of fear and fascination. Every human child learns basic self-defense because we know that the galaxy can be a dangerous place. We train for scenarios that we hope never to encounter, but we're ready if they occur. That's exactly the kind of insight that could prevent misunderstandings, Silvara said eagerly. Many species assume that human combat effectiveness comes from aggression or violence. They don't understand that it's actually based on careful preparation and defensive thinking. Sarah made her decision. All right, Commander. I'll participate in your demonstration, but I have conditions. Name them. First, this is educational only. I'm not training anyone to fight humans, and I'm not revealing classified military information. Second, the focus must be on defensive techniques and de-escalation when possible. And third, any species that participates must agree to share the recordings with their entire military and diplomatic corps. Silvara nodded enthusiastically. All acceptable terms. When can we arrange the demonstration? New Geneva has excellent training facilities, Sarah said. Give me 3 days to visit my grandchildren. Then we can set up whatever you need. As the Velterran officers departed to make arrangements, Captain Krelthok poured himself a drink and studied Sarah with renewed respect. You know, most beings would have taken advantage of their newfound reputation for personal gain. Instead, you're using it to build understanding between species. Sarah smiled and returned to her reading. Captain, humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years. We've learned that the best victory is the one that prevents the next conflict from starting. The transport ship continued its journey toward New Geneva, carrying not just passengers and cargo, but also the seeds of a new understanding between species. Word of the upcoming demonstration was already spreading through diplomatic channels, and representatives from dozens of worlds were requesting permission to observe. New Geneva's primary spaceport buzzed with unprecedented activity as diplomatic shuttles from across the galaxy converged on the human colony world. What had begun as a simple family visit had transformed into the most significant cross-species military demonstration in recent galactic history. Sarah stood at the observation deck of her hotel, watching the steady stream of alien vessels descending toward the planet's surface. Her grandchildren, 8-year-old Emma and 12-year-old Marcus, pressed their faces against the reinforced windows in wonder. Grandma, are all those ships here because of what you did at the space station? Emma asked, her eyes wide with excitement. In a way, yes, Sarah replied, gently stroking the girl's hair. Sometimes when you stand up for yourself, it teaches other people important lessons they didn't know they needed to learn. Marcus, ever the serious one, frowned thoughtfully. Dad says the aliens thought humans were weak, but you showed them we're not. It's more complicated than that, sweetheart, Sarah explained. They didn't think we were weak exactly. They just didn't understand how we think about strength. Different species define power in different ways. Through the window, they could see the sprawling complex of the new Geneva Defense Academy, where the demonstration would take place the following day. Military observers from over 30 species had requested attendance, and the event was being broadcast live to government and academic institutions across known space. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the colony's head of xenological studies, had spent the past 3 days helping Sarah prepare for the demonstration. She knocked gently on the hotel room door before entering with a cup of coffee and a worried expression. "Sarah, we've got a problem," she said without preamble. "The hegemony is sending observers." Sarah's blood chilled. The hegemony was a loose confederation of militaristic species that viewed humans as a potential threat to galactic stability. Their representatives were known for aggressive questioning and deliberate provocation, designed to expose weaknesses in other species' capabilities. "Which species?" Sarah asked. "Krillian shock troops, Vorthan battle tacticians, and at least one Nixari warform," Elena replied. "They're not coming to learn, Sarah. They're coming to evaluate human combat capabilities for potential countermeasures." The children looked between the two adults with growing concern. Emma tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Grandma, are the bad aliens coming to hurt us?" "No, sweetheart," Sarah assured her, though her mind was already racing through tactical possibilities. "They're just coming to watch and learn like all the others." But privately, she knew Elena was right to be concerned. The hegemony species were notorious for turning educational exchanges into competitive confrontations. They would push boundaries, test limits, and try to provoke responses that could be used to justify their existing prejudices against humanity. "What do you want to do?" Elena asked. "We could cancel the demonstration or restrict it to allied species only." Sarah considered the options carefully. Canceling would be seen as a sign of weakness and would likely confirm hegemony suspicions about human cowardice. Restricting attendance would be viewed as secretive and potentially threatening. But proceeding as planned meant risking a confrontation that could escalate beyond the educational scope of the original demonstration. "We proceed as planned," she decided, "but with modifications." "What kind of modifications?" Sarah smiled grimly. "The kind that turn a potential provocation into a teaching moment." The next morning, the new Geneva Defense Academy's main training facility was packed with observers, representing the greatest gathering of alien military specialists in human space. The facility had been designed to accommodate multiple species, with adjustable gravity fields, atmospheric controls, and viewing areas suitable for everything from methane-breathing Zephyrians to the massive bulk of Korvaxi generals. Sarah entered the training area wearing simple civilian clothing rather than military gear. She carried her father's rifle, now properly licensed and documented, along with a basic kit of training weapons that had been approved by all observing parties. Lieutenant Commander Silvara served as the primary coordinator, addressing the assembled observers through a translation matrix that converted her words into dozens of different languages simultaneously. "Today's demonstration will focus on basic human defensive combat techniques," she announced. "Our volunteer instructor will explain the philosophy behind human martial training and demonstrate several fundamental applications." A harsh voice cut through the translation static. "Philosophy is irrelevant. We came to see human combat effectiveness, not listen to speeches about theory." The speaker was General Vorthak of the Krillian Shock Forces, his chitinous exoskeleton scarred from countless battles. His species was among the most aggressive in known space, and his presence here was clearly intended to intimidate rather than educate. Sarah stepped forward calmly. "General, you're absolutely right. Actions speak louder than words. Would you like to volunteer for the first demonstration?" A ripple of nervous energy passed through the assembled observers. Most of them knew General Vorthak's reputation as one of the most formidable warriors in hegemony space. His challenge to the human woman was both unexpected and potentially explosive. Vorthak's mandibles clicked with amusement. "An interesting proposal, human, but I wouldn't want to damage our host before the real demonstration begins." "I appreciate your concern," Sarah replied evenly. "But human training techniques are designed to minimize injury to all participants. Unless, of course, you're not confident in your ability to control your responses during a simple exercise." The challenge was subtle but unmistakable. In front of representatives from 30 different species, the Krillian general's reputation was being questioned by a small human female. His response would be watched and analyzed by military leaders across the galaxy. Vorthak rose from his observer position, his 7-foot frame towering over Sarah as he approached the training area. "Very well, human. Show us these legendary techniques that defeated 5 security officers in 83 seconds. Sarah nodded respectfully. "Before we begin, I want to explain what you're about to see. Human combat training is based on a principle we call adaptive advantage. We study our opponents, identify their strengths and weaknesses, then develop techniques that turn their advantages into liabilities." She gestured to Vorthak's imposing form. "The general represents a perfect example. Krillians are stronger, faster, and more heavily armored than humans. In a direct confrontation using brute force, I would lose quickly and decisively." Murmurs of agreement came from the hegemony observers. This was exactly what they expected to hear from a supposedly inferior species. "However," Sarah continued, "Krillian combat doctrine is based on overwhelming force and intimidation. Your species evolved on a world where size and aggression determined survival. Your fighting style reflects this evolutionary heritage." Vorthak's eyes narrowed. "You speak as if you know our military secrets, human." "Not secrets, General. Publicly available information combined with direct observation. Your stance, the way you distribute your weight, the position of your arms, everything tells me how you've been trained to fight." Sarah moved into a ready position that looked almost casual compared to the general's aggressive posture. "Human training teaches us to read these signals and respond appropriately." "Enough talk," Vorthak growled. "Demonstrate or admit defeat." What happened next would be studied in military academies for decades to come. The Krillian general attacked with devastating speed and power, his massive fists cutting through the air with enough force to shatter steel. But Sarah was no longer where his blows were aimed. She had moved with the fluid grace of water flowing around stone, using the general's own momentum and aggression against him. As his first strike missed, she was already positioning herself for a counterattack that targeted the weak points in his exoskeleton that she had identified. During their conversation, the demonstration lasted exactly 47 seconds. When it ended, General Vorthak was on the training mat, breathing heavily but unharmed, while Sarah stood calmly beside him, offering a hand to help him up. "The key," she explained to the stunned observers, "is not to match your opponent's strengths, but to make their strengths irrelevant. The general's power and speed are impressive, but they become liabilities when turned against him through proper technique and timing." Vorthak accepted her assistance and rose to his feet, his expression a mixture of respect and bewilderment. "How did you know exactly where to strike? Krillian anatomy is not common knowledge among your species," Sarah smiled. "General, humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've developed an entire science around identifying vulnerabilities in armored opponents. When we encountered alien species, we simply applied the same analytical techniques to new anatomical structures." The demonstration continued with volunteers from other species, each encounter carefully designed to illustrate different aspects of human combat philosophy. The Vorthan battle tactician learned about human strategic thinking. The Nexari warform discovered the effectiveness of psychological warfare when combined with physical technique. 6 months after the New Geneva demonstration, the ripple effects continued to spread throughout galactic civilization. The carefully recorded footage had been analyzed by military strategists, diplomatic corps, and academic institutions across dozens of worlds. What had begun as a simple family visit had fundamentally altered how the galaxy perceived humanity. Sarah sat in her favorite chair on the porch of her daughter's house, watching Emma and Marcus practice the basic self-defense techniques she had taught them. The children moved with careful precision, applying the same analytical approach to learning that had made the demonstration so effective. "Remember," she called out as Emma worked through a defensive sequence, "it's not about being faster or stronger than your opponent. It's about understanding what they're going to do before they do it." Marcus paused in his practice to point at the sky, where another diplomatic shuttle was descending toward the spaceport. "Is that another alien ship coming to learn about humans, Grandma?" "Probably," Sarah replied. New Geneva had become an unofficial center for interspecies military and diplomatic education. The colony government had established formal exchange programs with over 20 different species, all seeking to understand human strategic thinking and combat philosophy. Dr. Elena Vasquez approached the house carrying a data pad full of reports and the expression of barely contained excitement. Over the past months, she had become the galaxy's leading expert on human-alien military relations, and her research was reshaping diplomatic protocols across known space. "Sarah, you need to see this," Elena said, activating her datapad's holo display. The latest intelligence reports from across the galaxy. The display showed a complex web of diplomatic and military developments. Trade agreements between human colonies and former hegemony worlds were increasing exponentially. Several species that had previously refused diplomatic contact with humanity were now requesting formal embassy exchanges. Most significantly, piracy and raiding in human space had dropped by over 60%. "Why the sudden change?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Word has spread," Elena explained. "Every pirate crew, raider faction, and aggressive military force in the galaxy has seen the footage from Nexus Station and New Geneva. They're realizing that humans aren't the easy targets they thought we were." She highlighted specific incidents on the display. 3 separate pirate fleets have actually changed course to avoid human shipping lanes. The Zarathi Hive fleets have requested non-aggression pacts with our outer colonies. Even the hegemony is proposing joint military exercises instead of territorial disputes. Sarah smiled as she watched her grandchildren continue their practice. Emma had just successfully demonstrated a complex joint lock that would have impressed her old Marine instructors. "So fear is accomplishing what diplomacy couldn't?" "Not fear exactly," Elena corrected. "Respect. There's a difference between being afraid of someone and recognizing that conflict with them would be more costly than cooperation." A communication alert chimed from Elena's datapad. She glanced at the incoming message and her eyebrows rose in surprise. "Sarah, this is addressed to you personally. It's from the Galactic Council's Security Committee." Sarah accepted the message and read it carefully, her expression growing thoughtful. The Council was requesting her presence at their next session to discuss human contributions to galactic security and peaceful conflict resolution. "They want me to address the entire Council," she said finally. "Formally present human military philosophy as a model for other species to study. Will you do it?" Elena asked. Sarah looked out at her grandchildren who were now helping each other perfect their defensive stances with the patient cooperation that characterized human learning. "I suppose I don't have much choice. This conversation is bigger than just my family now." 3 weeks later, Sarah stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council in the Great Chamber on Nexus Prime, the same space station where her confrontation with security had started, now hosted the most significant diplomatic presentation in recent galactic history. Representatives from over 100 species filled the vast amphitheater, their diverse forms creating a tapestry of galactic civilization. Some attended physically, others projected via hologram, but all were focused on the small human woman at the central podium. "Honored delegates," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation matrix. 6 months ago, a simple misunderstanding at a security checkpoint revealed something important about how our species interact with each other. Today I want to talk about what we've learned and where we go from here." She activated a holographic display showing statistical data from across the galaxy. Since the incidents at this station and on New Geneva, recorded conflicts between member species have decreased by 37%. Trade agreements have increased by 42%. Diplomatic exchanges are at an all-time high. A representative from the Altarian Commerce Guild rose to speak. "Ms. Chen, while these improvements are welcome, many of our constituents remain concerned about human military capabilities. How can we be certain that humanity will continue to use these abilities for peaceful purposes?" Sarah had expected this question. "Ambassador, that concern is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. Humans became effective warriors because we needed to protect the things we care about. Our families, our communities, our way of life. We didn't develop combat skills for conquest or domination." She gestured to the assembled delegates. "Every technique I demonstrated, every principle I explained, is fundamentally defensive in nature. Human military philosophy is built around deterrence and protection, not aggression and expansion." General Vorthak, now serving as a hegemony military advisor, stood to add his perspective. "The delegates' concerns are understandable but misplaced. Having studied human combat doctrine extensively, I can confirm that their techniques are designed to end conflicts quickly and with minimal casualties. He activated his own display showing comparative casualty statistics. Human military actions consistently result in lower overall casualties than conflicts involving other species of similar capability. They achieve victory through superior planning and precision rather than overwhelming force. A Zenthari philosopher raised a crystalline hand. Ms. Chen, your species seems to approach conflict as both art and science. This is unusual among galactic civilizations. How do you explain this duality? Sarah smiled. Humans learned long ago that violence is sometimes necessary, but should never be casual. We study warfare the same way we study medicine, with the goal of applying our knowledge as precisely and humanely as possible. Every human child learns basic self-defense, but we also teach them diplomacy, negotiation, and conflict prevention. We prepare for war so that we can preserve peace. We study violence so that we can minimize its necessity. The session continued for hours as delegates asked detailed questions about human history, military training, and diplomatic philosophy. What emerged was a picture of a species that had learned to balance strength with restraint, capability with responsibility. As the formal presentation concluded, Sarah was approached by delegates from dozens of species requesting additional educational exchanges. The galaxy had recognized that humanity offered something unique, a model for how advanced civilizations could maintain both the capability to defend themselves and the wisdom to choose peace whenever possible. Standing at the observation deck after the session, Sarah looked out at the bustling traffic of Nexus Station. Ships from across the galaxy moved peacefully through the commercial lanes, carrying trade goods, diplomatic envoys, and cultural exchanges that would have been impossible just months earlier. Her personal communicator chimed with an incoming message from New Geneva. Emma and Marcus appeared on the small screen, both of them practically bouncing with excitement. "Grandma!" Emma called out. "We saw you on the news. You were talking to all the aliens. Did you tell them about the practice techniques you taught us?" Marcus added. "Because Jenny's dad says humans are famous now for being really smart fighters." Sarah laughed. "I told them that humans are smart about a lot of things, including when not to fight at all." "When are you coming home?" Emma asked. "We want to show you the new defensive moves we learned." "Soon, sweetheart." "Very soon." As she closed the communication, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. A simple attempt to preserve a family heirloom had evolved into a galactic demonstration of human capability. But more importantly, it had opened a dialogue about strength, responsibility, and the true meaning of security in a diverse universe. The galaxy was learning that humans were more than they had appeared to be. And humanity was learning that their greatest strength might not be their ability to fight, but their capacity to teach others when fighting was unnecessary. In the end, that lesson would prove more valuable than any weapon.